We have a dangerous habit of lying to ourselves to feel safe. You hear a soft thump from the kitchen at 2 in the morning, and you immediately tell yourself it's just the house settling. You notice a door is unlocked when you swore you bolted it, and you decide you must be misremembering. Look at this threat assessment model. It maps out a psychological defense mechanism known as normalcy bias. When your brain encounters a sudden red flag, a confusing or potentially dangerous input, it actively filters that input and reroutes it straight into a safe, ignorable category. It is a biological glitch designed to keep you from panicking. The problem is that this bias tricks us. As that mental safe box grows artificially large to comfort you, it ignores the actual threat accumulating in the background. Your brain actively forces a benign explanation onto the situation because processing the terrifying alternative is simply too demanding on your nervous system. That mental reflex works perfectly fine right up until the input is a genuine physical threat. The system fails completely when a real danger slips straight past your mental filters because you are too busy convincing yourself everything was fine. True horror rarely begins with a sudden scare. It begins the exact moment your ability to rationalize danger collapses entirely, leaving you face to face with the reality you refuse to see. Take the case of a man who wanted total isolation. He brought his dog, Roscoe, and drove deep into a snowy state forest. He hiked out to a frozen clearing untouched by footprints, pitched a tent, and built a small fire. Shortly after dinner, Roscoe suddenly stood up and started barking aggressively into the pitch-black trees. The camper immediately leaned on his normalcy bias, telling himself it was just deer wandering nearby, and commanded his dog to relax. But the acoustic reality of a snowy forest makes denial incredibly difficult. Heavy snow acts as a massive acoustic absorber, deadening ambient noise until the woods are entirely silent. So 20 minutes later, when the distinct crunch of human footsteps began moving through the snow, it was impossible to ignore. A man appeared at the edge of the firelight. Half hidden in the dark, the stranger aggressively demanded to know what he was doing out there. When the camper pointed out he was armed, the stranger laughed, mocked him for his lack of hospitality, and faded back into the dark woods. Desperate to reclaim a sense of normalcy, the camper put out his fire, crawled into his tent, and tried to sleep. His denial held firm until he was awoken by his dog violently growling, at the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps circling right outside the thin canvas walls of his tent. Extreme isolation forces the brain to cling to these rationalizations. When you are miles from another human being, accepting that you are being hunted in the dark is psychologically devastating. You deny the predator exists until the footsteps stop directly outside your door. We assume that moving from an isolated forest to a densely packed city removes this danger. On a busy July 4th weekend in Charleston, two friends relied on the bustling crowds and loud markets to provide a sense of absolute security. Near the docks, they spotted a man wearing a crisp wedding suit and a bow tie. He had long, black curly hair and moved with a slow, detached, unnatural shambling walk, entirely out of sync with the busy tourists around him. Instinctively, they altered their path to avoid him, yet their brains immediately brushed him off as a harmless local eccentric. In a heavily populated tourist hub, social anonymity feels like an impenetrable shield. This vector map plots their movements through Charleston. The first line tracks the friends picking up their pace and winding deep into the city. But physical reality breaks down when we map the stranger. Despite his slow, shambling pace, he repeatedly appeared blocks ahead of them, perfectly intersecting their path in ways that were geographically impossible to achieve on foot. The situation hit an uncanny valley peak the next night. The friends watched the same suited man shambling through a dense, fast-moving nightlife crowd. No one noticed him. People brushed right past him without reacting, as if he existed slightly outside their reality. That night, the observer woke up to a tap on his window and saw the same man staring up at him from a dark alleyway. Crowds do not offer actual safety. They provide camouflage. Our automatic assumption that someone else in the crowd would intervene if something were genuinely wrong creates a massive blind spot for a patient threat. The most extreme form of denial happens where we feel the safest, inside our own homes. Consider a homeowner who lived alone in a small house, following a highly predictable, quiet daily routine of working from home and going to the gym late at night. A soft thump at 2:30 in the morning was easily blamed on the house settling. The next day, a loose back door handle was written off as old hardware. Then a phone found disconnected from its charger at 12% battery was dismissed as restless sleep. Look at how the brain actively works against survival here. It builds a compounding narrative of denial, stacking one false piece of logic on top of another. It does this to preserve the core belief that a locked house equals an impenetrable fortress. That logic collapsed on a Friday morning. The homeowner found faintly wiped-off muddy footprints leading inside from the back door. When he checked the lock he had previously blamed on faulty hardware, he found distinct pry marks scratched into the metal deadbolt. He took defensive action immediately. He had a locksmith replace the deadbolt, wedged a heavy chair under the back door handle, and locked his bedroom door before trying to sleep. At 4 a.m., he was suddenly jolted awake by the sound of fingertips lightly testing his bedroom doorknob. When he checked the house in the morning, the chair was still wedged in place, but the brand new back door deadbolt was unlocked. It hadn't been picked or damaged from the outside. The mechanism had been turned from the inside. Our homes represent the one environment where our normalcy bias goes completely unchecked, leaving our guard entirely down, even as the physical perimeter fails. The climax of this timeline occurred at 2 a.m. the following night. Hearing a noise, the homeowner found his basement door cracked open. Peering through the crack down into the pitch-black stairwell, he saw the unmistakable silhouette of a man standing completely still at the bottom. He bolted from the house and called the police. They pulled a barefoot man in dark clothes out of the basement in handcuffs. The officers uncovered the physical reality the homeowner had ignored for a week. The intruder had set up a camp behind the furnace, sleeping on old insulation, eating leftover food, and charging devices from the outlets. The final piece of evidence was discovered days later as the homeowner scrolled through his own camera roll. He found a photograph of himself, sleeping peacefully in his bed. The timestamp read 3:11 a.m. on the exact night he had assumed he unplugged his phone in his sleep. The trauma of the aftermath is rooted in the realization that your own logical brain fed you a steady stream of comforting lies, nearly allowing you to become a victim. When your instinct flags a detail that feels wrong, you have to trust it. The mental walls of denial you automatically build to protect your peace of mind are far easier for a predator to bypass than the physical locks on your doors.